There's so many ways to address bad ideas that are permeating our culture. There's a great quote from C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man. He said that good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. That same principle applies to satire, because bad ideas, bad philosophy have to be confronted. Mockery is one way of exposing foolishness, foolish ideas for what they are. It's a very effective way. And when you're predominantly focused on the ideas, I think it's a significantly different thing than when you're focused on people themselves.
Welcome to the Creation Today Show, where we bring together interviews with experts and solid Bible teaching. Your host, Eric Hovind, affirms the ultimate authority of God's Word, the truth of creation, and why it matters to you.
Hey guys, today we're talking about some serious humor. We want to take you into heaven's hive of humor where satire stings and unfortunately truth is often stranger than fiction. Let me start by saying thank you so much for joining me. We've called out the big guns to guide us through the comedy of God when addressing the absurdities that exist inside of God's world. My guest today is none other than the mastermind behind the Babylon Bee, where every headline is unfortunately a potential prophecy. He's a man who's turned the art of satire into a form of journalism. And so if it's true that laughter is like a medicine, we've got one of the best actors in the house. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of the Babylon Bee, Mr. Seth Dillon. Mr. Dillon, welcome to the Creation Today Show, sir.
Great to be here.
Over the last several years, we have been in can I call it a pandemic, where people are trying to suppress humor and eradicate it from the planet by calling it hate speech? Can you tell us what's going on and how that's affected you guys?
Well, yeah, there's been a real shift in culture over the last couple of decades, where humor was really treated as something that was healing and unifying and a positive, and levity was something that we welcomed, including jokes at our own expense, by the way, because we saw value in being able to laugh at ourselves, and people were really willing to do that. What we've seen, though, with this shift is really a desire for protection from ideas or criticism or mockery that might make us uncomfortable. The whole safe space idea that you hear. We've been trying to protect people. It's done in the name of protection, protecting especially young people on college campuses from hearing from speakers that might offend them or say something that makes them feel uncomfortable. And so it's affected humor. A lot of these ideas have affected humor because, jokes, there's always someone who's the butt of the joke, or something that's the butt of the joke. And every joke is offensive in some way for that reason. And the question is whether or not it needs to be tossed out entirely because of that, or is there actually some value to it? And I think that we've made a tremendous mistake by trying to protect people from things that are actually beneficial. And so humor is one of those things. And so I'm happy to have a conversation about that if you want to dig into it.
I would love to. Give me a little bit about your background. If I understand it correctly, you are a preacher's kid. Is that right? Your dad's a pastor or was a pastor?
Yeah. My dad is a retired pastor now. So he was a pastor my entire life. I grew up in the church. So we bounced around a little bit.
So
oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, I was attending church and Sunday school and youth group and everything in my dad's own churches, sitting in the pews, listening to him preach for 20 years before I went off to college, and then, settled down here in South Florida. He eventually came down here too.
Nice.
And now they're retired here. But I grew up in the church. So I have a church background. It's one of the things that drew me into the Bee itself, because I didn't start the Bee. I acquired the Bee in 2018. It was started in 2016 by a man named Adam Ford. And but the Bee caught my attention the way it's caught a lot of other people's attention, just by coming across my feed, these jokes where I'm like, well, for one thing, is this real? What is this? But then there were the great church jokes. Like one of the first ones that I remember catching my eye was a joke about how the headline read something like, Holy Spirit unable to move through congregation as fog machine breaks. And it showed this image of a cloudy sanctuary, so cloudy that you could barely make out the stage, And so jokes like that really struck a chord with me in a positive way because they were inside church humor that I really appreciated and understood myself, having grown up in the church. And it was just great to see somebody doing humor from that perspective, because there wasn't a lot of comedy being done from a particularly biblical or Christian worldview. Very little of it, especially that wasn't cheesy. And so the
Right.
beat came out. It wasn't cheesy. It was actually genuinely funny. It poked at the church a lot, but in love and for the right reasons. And so um, I thought it was spectacular. And so I wanted to get involved. So now I've been running the thing for the last 6 years. We've been around for 8, but I've been running it for 6. And so yeah, but my background has been instructive in that for sure.
Well, thank you for going through the genesis of the Babylon Bee. Since we talk about Genesis all the time, we do appreciate that. The overview, though, of what your day looks like, what your week looks like, do you guys specifically focus on politics because there's always material, or is that just where you see the biggest need?
Well, we don't focus exclusively on politics. I think there is a misconception that we started as like a church humor site and then transitioned into the political world because we're sellouts or something like that.
Ah,
It's not really like that. It's always been and continues to be a mix of the two. We still do plenty of um, evangelical Christian humor. Um, the
there's plenty
headlines.
of that to make fun of. That's
There's
true.
plenty of that. It does become more challenging over time. It's harder to come up with new jokes in an area where you've been making them for years. So, as things develop and evolve in the church, or as the church faces new issues, obviously that presents new opportunities for more writing. But it does become challenging to keep making jokes in that sphere. So that's one element that plays into that a little bit, that shift that people perceive. But we still try every day. The headlines, though, are just a steady stream. It's just a fire hydrant spewing out stuff that's worth looking at and covering. And the Bee from the beginning was always doing some of the political and cultural commentary too. So, but the headlines just, every day there's new stuff happening in the world that commands our attention. So that is really the primary fuel for what we look at each day, is what's going on in the news. And as a satirical news publication, that's our job, is to look at that every day and figure out, how in the world can we satirize this? This feels like parody, but we'll try our best.
I remember when it first started, I was definitely confused. I remember, like, can I share this headline because this is fake news? It totally caught me off guard. Did the church, from evangelicals, from the church's perspective, because I want to get into the comedy of God here. Ultimately, I want to answer, does God have a sense of humor? And
Yeah.
obviously you believe he does. But was there pushback from the church at first going, wait a minute, we're not allowed to do this. This isn't something we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to love and respect, man, gentleness and fear. We're supposed, like, come on. How do you balance that? And just I'm really curious how you think through the comedy of God, and then, of course, how it works out when you're responding to anybody that's pushing back.
Well, it's been a common criticism throughout. We still get that criticism a lot.
Okay.
It is often from Christian audiences too. We will hear, and it's a question that I field often when I'm speaking places, is, someone will ask me, how do you reconcile cracking jokes or engaging in ridicule, which it sounds very negative to use that term, mockery, ridicule. How do you justify that? What is your justification for using that as your method for reaching people with your message and with communicating truth? And I mean, there's so many ways to address that question, and there's so many ways to address bad ideas that are permeating our culture. And there's a great quote from C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man. He said that good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. And I think that same principle applies to satire, because bad ideas, bad philosophy, which is bad ideas, have to be confronted. And there's a number of ways to confront them. The good philosophy is one aspect of that. You can engage in rational argumentation and refutation of bad ideas. But you can also undermine them with ridicule and mockery. Foolishness shouldn't be taken seriously. And so, mockery is one way of exposing foolishness, foolish ideas for what they are. It's a very effective way. And when you're predominantly focused on the ideas, I think it's a significantly different thing than when you're focused on people themselves. And I do make this distinction very clear when
That's
I try to
boy.
explain, what the Babylon Bee's mission is. Well, for one thing, we want to make people laugh. We're an entertainment site, we're a comedy site. We want to evoke laughter, but we also want to ridicule bad ideas. We want to ridicule bad ideas. And the reason we feel like there's a moral imperative to ridiculing bad ideas because bad ideas taken seriously have catastrophic consequences.
Yeah.
So, and we see that every day in our culture right now. So, I think there's really a moral imperative to that. And what we're doing there is by focusing on ideas, what I'm talking about there is the distinction between, making fun of somebody for the purpose of making them feel bad about themselves, just putting them down, the way that a bully would just tearing someone down for their appearance or something that they can't control about themselves and making them feel stupid and dumb and awful. That is quite different from deploying satire to kind of take aim at what I would call, social cancers that need to be excised before they kill the host, which is society itself. And so from that perspective, you talk, we're often talk. The bee is often characterized as having a sting, the bee with the stinger, and the satire stings, and sometimes it hurts, sometimes it upsets people. But what is the purpose of this sting? What is it that's causing the discomfort, and what's the motive behind it? That all matters. And when you start digging into that, when I look at like the moral philosophy behind satire itself, you really see a clear distinction between cutting someone for the purpose of wounding them and cutting them the way that a surgeon might, for example. If you zoom in and you look at a surgery, it looks like a knife is cutting skin and it looks like someone's trying to hurt somebody else. It looks like they're wounding them. But what if you're wounding them for a healing purpose? What if the cut is to remove cancer? You zoom out a little bit, you don't just see the knife on skin, you see that it's a surgeon in an operating room, and suddenly you realize, oh, well, this is actually a healthy thing that's happening here. This surgeon is cutting out cancer. Well, I think that's what the satirist's job is to do, is to identify what those social cancers are and cut them out with the sharp tools of ridicule and mockery so that they don't kill the host. So that's how I would kind of explain the moral philosophy behind why we address bad ideas in the way that we do. And I think, to throw another quote at you, Chesterton was the one who said that humor can get in under the door while seriousness is still fumbling at the handle. And I think that just, it's a very eloquent way of explaining how when you wrap a message in the package of humor, it's very, very easily delivered and received.
Do you see a lot of humor in the Bible? I mean, I can't help but think of Jonah. Why does God have him get swallowed by a fish? I mean, that's got some
Yes.
humor. Balaam's donkey talks to him. Why does he smite the Philistines when they take the Ark of the Covenant with hemorrhoids? I mean, of all the different things he could have given
Elijah
them.
mocking prophets. Yeah, there's just
Yes.
a bunch of examples. There's hyperbolic language that's used in the Bible. There, very strong, biting analogies and comparisons. And there is, in fact, ridicule and scorn that's directed at things that are either blasphemous or just bad ideas. So, I think there's a substantial amount of biblical precedent for it. Of course, your motive matters. Like I was saying before, it's not about making people feel better. It's if you love people, you want to tell them the truth. You have to love them enough to tell them the truth rather than to coddle them and protect them and from hearing the truth because it might hurt their feelings. And I think humor is one of the ways that you can accomplish that.
So if we just, as the church, sometimes have we just swallowed almost, if I can call it, the woke mentality, where you can't hurt anybody, you got to be nice to everybody. When again, like you said, you're not trying to hurt them, you're trying to do a surgery to take the cancer out of them. Have we just kind of swallowed the wrong mentality? We believed something, so to speak, that has been pushed on us. Is that kind of what's happened?
What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry, it broke up just a little
Has
bit.
the church swallowed a woke mentality? Have we taken on this idea that we're not allowed to make fun of anything? And you
Yes.
distinguish between ideas and people, and the church has kind of gone, well, wait a minute, no, we're not allowed to make fun of anything now because of the Bible.
Certainly, and you see it with words like tolerance is a great one.
Yeah.
The church has swallowed, to use your language there, this idea that tolerance is the most, it's like the highest virtue. And when I say the church, some in the church, not all in the church
Right.
have done this, but there are certainly some who have adopted this mentality, and it is a woke idea, that tolerance is the highest virtue, and that we need to be, the only way to love people is to tolerate things that really are, in fact, intolerable. Especially if you want to bring the Bible into the conversation and look at things that are intolerable. There's quite a long list. And sin at every level, whether it's actions or sins of the heart, and your motivations and your thought life. There's a lot that's intolerable. There are things that we shouldn't, as a society, tolerate because they're damaging and destructive and harmful. Harmful in the most serious sense of pulling people away from God. And so, the Christian perspective on tolerance, I think, it's a big conversation that we need to continually have, because there are certainly people out there who are expressing the need to refrain from confronting a lot of these bad ideas in the name of compassion and kindness and tolerance, which just allows them to do more harm than they would otherwise do. And so I don't think it's really, it's harming in the effort to help. You're doing more harm, which is not just counterintuitive, it's counterproductive. And ultimately, I don't think it's what Christians are called to do when they're engaging in the culture.
All right, if I can ask for some personal advice, we deal with the realm of creation versus evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always frustrated by how many lies are being told to prop up the evolution worldview. You deal with people telling lies, or the headlines and lies in media. You deal with lies all the time that are being used to prop up a narrative. Is that like a special, oh man, that's a softball setup? Like, how do you think, when you see deliberate lies coming out, with stuff going on in the news, or a politician saying something to support what he's trying to say? Is that like a special, man, I'm really going to call that out hard? Or how do you guys think through that?
Well, it is important to call it out, and it is often very obvious when it's happening too. But I call them guardians of the narrative. They will, and a lot of the effort to silence and suppress us has been, carried out by these guardians of the narrative, who have something that they want people to believe, that they want people to accept. And so what they'll do is they will not only say things that are false, but they will try to silence anyone who tries to confront those things with the truth. And so that ends up being a recipe for, dictating what people think and believe, or are even allowed to say, which is tyrannical for one, dishonest, of course, for another, and certainly has to be dealt with. And so we've encountered that quite a bit, where there's lies and misinformation about us. It's funny how the New York Times characterized us. They said that we were trafficking in misinformation under the guise of satire. So of course they were,
Wow.
they were judging our motives, suggesting that we were in fact trying to misinform people by leading people to believe that we're, a satire site, so that we could push through these false stories that people will believe, as if we are trying to advance false narratives, and have bad motives. But that itself was a lie. So the New York Times was actually engaging in misinformation to smear us of being guilty of it. Which I thought was just kind of fascinating. I think they're trafficking in misinformation under the guise of journalism. But yeah, that's certainly a problem. And I'm sure, yeah, you deal with that a lot. There's a ton of misinformation that's used to prop up evolutionary theory and atheism more broadly. And at the same time, the stamping out of dissent, and the effort to just shame and ostracize and actually silence anyone who challenges those things. And it's a big red flag, because all it does to me, in my mind, when I see that happening, is it conveys to me a tremendous amount of insecurity and fragility in the views of those who are adopting those tactics. If you're very confident in what you believe in, you'll welcome debate. And if you're not welcoming debate, if you're not willing to even hear the other side, you're just conveying how threatened you are by them. And why are you so threatened by it? Those are important questions.
For everybody out there on social media watching, what is your advice to the average person out there on social media that they just, man, they're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. They're just scroll. Obviously, join the Babylon Bee. Okay, I'm a member. You guys need to join the Babylon Bee. But like from
Please.
a practical, like, okay, day to day, how do they make sure that they are being positive with what they do? They're helping take culture in the right direction, let alone obviously how they treat people. But what are some practical things that you would say, man, if people would just do these things, it would really help us correct the narrative or right the wrong or present the truth? How do you think through that?
Oh man. Well, there's probably a long list that I could give, but I think maybe first and foremost is to refuse to play along with the game where they're actually trying to get you to censor yourself and not speak up. People cave to that pressure a lot. They cave to it for a number of reasons. You know, they don't want to be mocked and made fun of themselves. They don't want to be they certainly don't want to face penalties for saying things that are disallowed, you know, things that are misinformative according to the guardians of the narrative, things that are considered hateful, for example. We have to be willing to speak the truth boldly and not censor ourselves, because as I've said it many times, you've probably heard me say it in other contexts, but when you censor yourself, that soft censorship that happens where you refrain from speaking, you're really just doing the tyrant's work for him. And so, you know, make them censor you, make them silence your voice. Don't do it for them. And when you are willing to speak, what ends up happening is if you are actually willing to take a bold stand for the truth and speak the truth in love, with courage, you will inspire other people to do that. They will see it. It's like you're giving them permission that they can also speak and be unafraid. And one of the things that I think is encouraging when I suggest this to people, because we've done this ourselves. You know, we've taken a stand for the truth and refused to censor ourselves in some notable cases. And ultimately, what it ends up doing is it only attracts more attention when they're trying to suppress your voice. They really just draw more attention to you and amplify your voice too. So we've experienced that a great deal. So I just encourage people to be bold. You've got to be courageous. And in the culture right now, it really is a spiritual desert where people are starving for truth and beauty and goodness. You know, we're in the middle of this culture war where there's literally an all-out war. War is the right word for it, on reality, reason, truth, goodness, and beauty. And we have to be able to have an answer for that and to push back on that. And I'm hopeful that we will have success in that, because I think that this desire for what's true and what's good and beautiful is baked into us by our Creator. We were designed that way. We're made in the image of God. We have this desire for the truth and for goodness and beauty inside us. And so what ends up happening when you live in a spiritual desert like our culture, you know, you deprive people of what they crave, what they need, what they're designed to want. It makes them thirsty for it. Just like if you put a man in the middle of the desert, he's going to become thirsty for water. And so I hear a lot lately about how people are waking up from woke, and they're coming out of this kind of this spell that's been cast on them, and the gaslighting that they've endured, and the disillusionment and the cynicism. You see people waking up from this stuff, and that leaves them receptive to turn to something else. They need to be presented with an alternative worldview. And so the way that I like to say it is, you know, when people start looking around and saying, you know, what is the alternative? Is there a view that rather than exulting in sin and depravity offers hope and healing and forgiveness and grace and love and truth? We need to present that so that they see that. So when they start turning to look for God, they actually find him.
Where do you think this is going to go in our culture? We see what's happening in the UK right now. People are getting arrested for making a social media post that, okay, we're here in America. We're here in Florida. We got a great governor right now. Okay, around the US, what do you think? Could that happen here, or is that totally dependent on our actions?
It will happen here, I think, if there's not enough opposition to it. You know, there are a lot of people who are hungry for that kind of power and control over what you're allowed to say and what you're allowed to think. It is a constant fight. I gave a talk recently for First Liberty, which defends religious freedom, with you know, pro bono, you know, legal aid to people who are facing, you know, discrimination of some kind, or just violations of their right to practice their faith and doing their business or whatever. they, they are confronting this in the legal realm, which is an ongoing battle. The rights that we have that are secured for us in the Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution are under constant assault and attack. And so they will continue to look for angles where they can wrest more control, and silence more voices. And so there has to be constant pushback on that. And we can't defend any of the things that we value. When we're talking about, whether it's the pro-life versus pro-abortion argument, or the gender madness, any of this stuff. You can't defend these. You can't defend your positions. You can't defend life. You can't defend truth if you can't speak freely. That's there are more fundamental rights than the right to speak freely. I think the right to life is even more fundamental than the right to speak freely. But you can't defend life if you can't speak freely. So we have to continually fight and win that battle. And that battle has come to our shores for sure. So we're engaged in it at every level we can be.
Yeah, so we're here right now. I kind of wonder. Well, let me go. Speaking of where we're at today, 10 years ago, we would have had no clue. 20 years ago, no clue that we'd be talking about and dealing with some of the issues that we're dealing with today, especially when it comes to the LGBT, transgender, transitioning kids. How many other things that Babylon B, you guys wrote a book on prophecies that have come true that you guys have actually, it was satire at one time and now it's true. Do you have some of those off the top of your head that you could tell our audience of?
I mean, there's a bunch of examples. We have a spreadsheet where we're tracking them. And we update it on the website from time to time. I think we're up to like 109 or 110 jokes that we told that later came true. Sometimes really quickly after we told the joke. Sometimes it was really silly stuff. Like, we made a joke about how during COVID, people were working from home, so they weren't even wearing pants. And so we wrote a headline. They were just sitting there at their computers, on Zoom calls with a nice shirt on, but just in their boxers or something like that. So we wrote a joke about how pants sales were plummeting as everyone was working from home. But then like the next day in Yahoo Finance, there was a headline about how Walmart was seeing increased sales of tops, but not bottoms because of COVID. And so like little stuff like that, but there's so many of them. We did a joke about how Gavin Newsom was our pick Gavin Newsom was named U-Haul Salesperson of the Year. And then Fox Business did a report like a month later about how U-Haul was running out of trucks because so many people were leaving California for Texas and other states. There's a ton of those. We even did one, probably the most popular of the jokes, like it was the most widely shared that ended up getting fact checked and then later came true, was a joke that we did about Donald Trump. Actually, we joked, we put these words in Trump's mouth. We said, "Trump, I have done more for Christianity than Jesus," and that was just a joke about Trump's big ego and the outlandish things that he says. And people thought that was true. So many people thought it was true. There was even a New York Times reporter that shared that, believing it was true. And so, of course, Snopes had to step in and fact check it and rate it false, which they tend to do with our jokes too. And that was funny. It was funny that it got fact checked after it had gone viral. But then he went on a radio show like a year later and said he's done more for Christianity and religion in general than any other person in history. So he actually took it a step further than the joke itself. So we're just seeing this constantly happening, where we will throw something out there that is satire at the time it's published, and then it ends up coming true. And it's one of the challenges of doing satire in an age of absurdity. To quote Chesterton again, he said, this was in 1911, he said that the world has become too absurd to be satirized. And
that was in 1911.
In 1911.
Wow.
And I wonder sometimes, I think, like I don't know what he had in mind when he wrote that. Like what cultural issues was he dealing with and thinking of that led him to put pen to paper and write that statement? Because when you think about it, if you were to transport Chesterton into today's world, where you literally you Google the question, can men get pregnant? The answer is yes. And it's probably more common than you might think. That's from healthline.com. It'll be the top Google result when you search that question. We're convincing children that they can be a boy trapped in a girl's body, and that the answer to that is not to try to fix the confusion in their mind, but to match their body to their confusion and mutilate the body to match a broken mind. That kind of stuff is happening right now. And I don't even know that he would believe it. He did talk about how he warned about how we will soon live in a time where, people are going to say that 2 and 2 make 5. They're going to say that with a straight face. They're going to tell you you're a heretic for saying that grass is green or the sky is blue. And that's exactly where we're finding ourselves in the culture right now. And the result of that, because people are saying the opposite of what's true and pushing these radical ideas so aggressively, and how that's all advancing so rapidly, it makes doing satire extremely challenging, because what you're trying to do is look at what's actually happening in the world and exaggerate it a little bit. Satire is not always, but largely it depends on caricature. You're caricaturing what's happening in the world, and a caricature is just an exaggeration. So when you're exaggerating something that already seems like a parody, that's challenging. But then, of course, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 3 months later, as we get further down the road of madness that we call progress, the crazy thing that was a joke actually happens.
Man, well, I don't know if this would fall into the definition of madness, but you guys did predict another one that you can add to the list. You guys said Ken Ham was going to make Night at the Creation Museum, and we actually made Night at the Creation Museum. So
Nice.
that one did come true. Hey, I got to let
That's
social
amazing.
media go. Before you guys go, please take this seriously. God does have a sense of humor. Okay, there is so much in here that you'll find, and humor is a great weapon I love that quote, to get under the door when logic and reason is still fumbling at the handle to try to get in. We see that. I see that all the time. I can't have a logical conversation with somebody. I got to bring humor into the conversation for them to take it and actually start thinking through something. So
And not
make sure you
just
join
that,
the
but like
Babylon Bee. Go ahead, Seth.
when people have abandoned rationality on purpose, it is very difficult to reason with them, because what reason are you going to appeal to? They've given it up. And so sometimes the most effective and really one of the only options that you have left at your disposal in that context, when people have literally abandoned rational, they're looking you straight in the face and telling you that 2 and 2 make 5. Mockery of that madness is really one of the only options you have.
2 Peter 3 warned us that there's going to be people in the last days, scoffers coming in the last days, and they will be, it literally says, willingly ignorant.
Yes.
And my dad always said in the Greek, that means dumb on purpose. They really
Yes.
are. They are willingly ignorant of the truth. They don't want to believe it so that they can live the life they want to live.
Right. And when you engage with them, you're not always trying to change their mind. So this is one of the other points that's important to make. Say it for the people on the sidelines, because there are people, when you're on social media especially, there's a lot of people watching and observing the interaction that you have with people who've abandoned rationality. And so you may not change their mind because they're willfully ignorant, but you might change the minds of the people who are listening in.
Love it. Hey, social media, I got to let you go. If you want to finish this conversation, come on over to creationtoday.org. In the meantime, 2 things I want you to do. Please head on over to the Babylon Bee, sign up. At least share their headlines, share the news out there. And just by you sharing that on your social media feed, that is part of you standing up and saying, I'm going to let my voice be heard. I'm not going to self-censor and allow the tyrants to have control. So please be a part of that, of spreading the truth. If you don't like that particular link or that particular way to do it, find some way to do that. And the second thing is this: go share the gospel with somebody who needs to hear it. There are people out there who desperately need to hear the truth of God's word. Let's go out there and start sharing that with people today. Come on over to creationtoday.org if you want to hear the rest of this. Partner with us and you can help us reach the world.